This week, we make it up as we go as both Keith and Paul are gone. In the news segment, Oracle patches 284 vulnerabilities. A bug in the Twitter Android app exposed protected tweets. 4 tips for better API security in 2019 and more. Stay tuned for Application Security Weekly.
This is a Security Weekly production. Signal Sciences secures the most important web applications, APIs, and microservices of the world's leading companies, protecting over 7,500 applications and 150 billion production requests per week. Signal Sciences Next-Gen WAF and RASP help companies increase security and maintain site reliability without sacrificing velocity, all at the lowest total cost of ownership. Signal Sciences' patented technology protects any application against any attack, with integrations into any DevOps toolchain. Signal Sciences, demand more from your WAF. Learn more at signalsciences.com/PSW.
Welcome to Application Security Weekly. This is episode number 47, recorded January 21st, 2019. It is Martin Luther King Day. I am your host, Matt Alderman, sitting in for Keith Hoodlett, who's in Mexico. It is work-related, folks, so it's okay. Also joining me this week is James Wickett, who's sitting in for Paul, who is home with the kids because it's a holiday. Hey, James, welcome.
Hey, how you doing, Matt? Glad to be here on the show.
Thanks for filling in for us this week. We're going to have some fun because we're just going to make it up as we go.
I like that. That's a good strategy for today.
Yeah. All right. If you're interested in quality over quantity and having meaningful conversations instead of just a badge scan, join us April 1st to 3rd at Disney's Contemporary Resort for InfoSec World 2019, where you can connect and network with like-minded individuals in search of actionable information. Visit infosec.world.misty.com/security-weekly and use the registration code OS19-SecWeek for 15% off the main conference or World Pass. We have a number of interviews scheduled with confirmed speakers across all of our shows, so please tune in and learn more about the topics that will be covered at the conference. Also, check out our on-demand material. Some of our previously recorded webcasts are now available on demand at securityweekly.com/on-demand. All right. So originally, we were going to do a segment on kind of the human element of application security, and then we had some guest host changes. And James was kind enough to say, well, wait, I can cover some stuff there. Let's do that. So we're going to talk about some of the human elements of application security training and testing and understand kind of the impact there. And so, James, why don't you start us off? You had a few thoughts and ideas on this segment, and I wanted you to kind of start us off here for.
Yeah. Let's take a step back and think about how is it that we build applications? How is it that applications come to be? And it's people are actually writing them, putting them together. They're nowadays, like, we're putting together a bunch of different frameworks, and we can get a fully featured, rich application that's ready to go, running in the cloud or somehow in production in like 100 lines of code, right? Or 1,000 lines of code, something very small compared to what we used to do in the past. And we used to take the idea that we would spend a lot of time kind of doing application security type training. If you read through any of the compliance standards, it talks about taking regularly doing on an annual basis security training for all your developers and all the people that are responsible for delivering applications. This is a bit of a hot take here, but I think application security training is dead, and I think we need to just focus on creating feedback loops from all different parts of the environment, but no longer focus on application security training, because hauling a bunch of developers in the room for a couple hours and teaching them, like, here's how cross-site scripting works, or here's how it is, like I don't think that is going to be meaningful. And we've seen like application security hasn't really gotten better based off of doing this type of training. I mean, we look at the OWASP top 10 list. It's virtually unchanged over the last 15 years. and we still are left with a lot of the same problems that we've always been having. So those are kind of some hot takes in there. I don't know, Matt, where you want to go from there, but hey, this is make it up as we go day to day. So.
Yeah, well, I think it's interesting, right? We've been trying to focus on this shift right? Take the development teams, try to shift them to the right, as people used to say, and educate them on security issues and try to have them produce better code. And it really hasn't worked. And then we get the DevOps movement, and now we talk about security and how they have to shift left. And a lot of security folks haven't shifted left yet. And so you bring up a very interesting point to say, well, wait a minute, if security, application security training is kind of dead, then it behooves us probably as security practitioners to figure out, how do we integrate into the existing DevOps pipeline and secure the code and really try to move aspects left, because moving right didn't work.
Yeah. And another piece of this, and I think we can get into feedback here in a second, but why is it that we treat security vulnerabilities and security bugs effectively as something wholly different than just regular bugs that are put into an app, when they're actually not any different at all? One is just a security vulnerability is a bug that could be exploited to have something happen. A regular type of bug is a bug that's encountered and system crashes or some sort of degraded thing happens. But that's all speaking about how we do development based on the outcome of what actually happens. Like what what is the outcome of the bug? Is it an error, or things get messed up on the back end as the user's experience, or does it actually allow some sort of insecure access? So a bug in a certain part of the system with other dependencies tied to it actually could be some sort of reasonable exploitable thing. And we know that we don't train developers to write code that has no bugs. That is not a thing that is done in the development world. You don't go into a team and say, all right, developers, like let's now, we're going to do this training class. I'm going to teach you, how to I don't know, do like error handling and exception handling, and this is how it should always be done, or this is how we should always treat this this sort of data value type or whatever. And we don't say like, now you're going to always write this type of code and never have any bugs. What we do instead, we say, here's some patterns for stability. Here are some code smells. Like if you're making too many references inside of each other. And there's been research that's been done on this in computer science journals and papers for decades. And we see that defect density is pretty stagnant. I mean, it's pretty much a constant. I mean, it depends on what language you're using and what framework, but you're going to always get a few defects per thousands lines of code that are written by humans. Sometimes they'll be featured in different parts of the area, in parts of the language for whatever stack you're working in, and it depends based on which framework or stack you're actually doing development in. But as a whole, like, it's humans writing code. When humans do technical work, there is some sort of error rate that's going to happen. So we'll make kind of philosophical things. Developers make ideas like dry to say, like, don't repeat yourself. So that's a pattern that they can put into their code when they write things. But there's also things like linting, code validation. We have this special things to scan through our code to say we have banned functions that we don't want to use. So all those types of things are the ways that we check. But then we also have like unit testing and test-driven development or behavior-driven development or ATDD or whatever it is your test strategy is going to be. But we focus on those types of things, kind of some patterns that can be helpful for people, and then tests that kind of give the feedback for them.
So you bring up a good point, that a bug is a bug is a bug, whether a security bug or not a security bug. When I was at RSA for a number of years, and I would go around meeting with different clients, and back then everybody was trying to figure out the SIM problem, right? It was kind of the reinvention of the SIM market. And a customer, it was over in Europe, actually. I think it was in Ireland, or no, it must have been up in Scotland. And we're sitting there, we're having discussions about the types of logging they want to collect and how it impacts their SOC processes. And the guy looks at me and goes, look, I don't want just security logs. I want all logs. A box that's almost out of memory or CPU is getting ready to fail causes me just as much of an outage or an issue than a security incident would as well. So he goes, I don't want to just focus on the security logs and incidents. I want to look at everything. And your point was, even if it's not a security bug, a bug that does something not expected in an application potentially causes an issue. And so why do we separate them and look at them differently? So I think that's a really good point, is that we should include security bugs as part of your normal bug process. It shouldn't be a process bolted on after the fact. And I've been saying this for years, is that we just treat security as this extra bolt on when it should be truly integrated in with the security, with the build process and in the development process itself, and not this thing that happens at the end.
Well, we allowed security to take the place inside of a waterfall development lifecycle, where we just do the testing on an annual type cadence, and that was okay a decade ago. Or well, we could probably argue that it maybe wasn't okay even then. But let's just assume that the cadence has changed, development patterns have changed. Now we have to do something different. We actually need to be kind of creating that feedback loop from in development and all the way to production to developers that are writing code, and that's a lot better than training, how to write, how to get cross-site scripting working, or how to, understand some of these things. But sending broken tests back to the developers, that's the currency of developers. In fact, I often will say that it's like that's how we communicate with each other, is through tests and saying like, this is how, if we accept what we wrote, or it met the requirements or didn't. And then also like real-time production data, right? Are we seeing spikes in our in our memory usage or CPU usage, like you mentioned, from the application side? Or we see a number of sessions happen, too many logins, logouts, anything about the application. Some set of that might be security related, but another set of it is just like raw performance of the application and production.
So how do you? This has been like the $1 billion question, is how do we make this work at the end of the day, right? If we truly want what everybody talks about in DevSecOps, right? How do you actually integrate security in to the DevOps process effectively, so that we get to this nirvana of everything comes together? If it's a bug, it's a bug. It doesn't matter whether it's a security bug or not. How do we do this? I mean, what's the approach everybody needs to start looking at to integrate these two disciplines together?
Yeah, I think we're still figuring that out. I think that there's been a lot of work already been done through folks like Shannon Leitz, kind of in the DevSecOps idea to pull people together, to think about meaningful metrics, like what are your adversaries going after, and she tries to calculate like adversary return rate is a real interesting metric to feedback. Also, doing things like having a red team testing on Mondays. So it's like red team Mondays that, they try to attack the app, but they've tried to build some cultural things into it. I see some of the work that Topo Paul over at Capital One's been doing. I think that's really encouraging. But let's just say we don't know the answer, but we have a roadmap for us that's already been laid out ahead of time. And that roadmap is whenever dev and ops kind of came together. And back in 2009, it used to be developers just threw the code over to operations, and then the operations team would, say, hey, we don't want to deploy this because it's going to break everything. And, they had this two silos. There's the wall of confusion. And that movement was able to take off and continue to grow. And, still to this day, like I'd say that movement is still continuing to grow. Well, security is yet another silo. So that is trying to kind of merge into that group and that ability to make the changes inside of their organizations, make the changes inside of their team structures and the way they put this together. Now, we could list a bunch of tooling. You can put, static code analysis tools in your pipeline. You can put security like RASPs or next generation web app firewalls inside of your production side. You could do newer testing things through testing tools like Gauntlet or Robot or other stuff like that. But if you're not aligning your security and your DevOps teams and kind of putting those together and making some sort of hybrid, like I think that's the first place you start, is that cultural alignment, and like that we all have a shared responsibility together instead of this separate, dev, ops, and sec.
So do you think we get to the point where we start seeing security folks embedded into the DevOps teams and not as a separate discipline?
I think that we'll see that. I mean, there's some prior art on all this, right? Because it would be for every 10 developers, you would have like one operations person, and then it was like, well, that ratio is not so great. So maybe every 3 or 4 developers, we throw an operations person on the team, and that's kind of the DevOps team. And then we started aligning based off of product, and that was a helpful way to do it. Now we're seeing the backwards movement, and I say backwards movement because the way that a lot of people implement SRE through the kind of the SRE book and things like that is they're taking operations and moving it back into its own silo, which that'll frustrate some people from hearing me say that. But they're now offering kind of like operations type services for long-term, running support. So a lot of it depends. It depends on like what kind of application you're running, what services you're doing. Are you running SaaS or some other type of product, and how your organizational structure is setting up. But putting security people inside of those teams, or if you can't have the budget for that, which most people don't, and we don't have headcount in the industry to fill, if we added like a +1 security for every team out there, like that's not a fillable position. So we have like security champions or people that are sort of like part of the movements that we've seen. Folks like over at Etsy, this is one of the things that they did over there.
Yeah. So could we see like kind of like a security kind of team that kind of wraps and integrates with the DevOps team? Not so it's like a hard ratio. It's not like for every 3 to 4 developers, I have one ops guy and one security guy, but does security become this kind of integral fabric with different, and their responsibility literally is, as new tools get introduced to improve the overall CI/CD flow, this team or this person really is there to make sure that all the different processes and tools are integrated together, therefore creating this more unified kind of fabric through the whole thing, instead of like, well, I need this many headcount. Because I agree with you. I think that's really difficult with the skill set shortage we have today.
Yeah, most of the high-performing security organizations are doing just that. They're saying, let's focus on adding automation to our pipeline. Let's focus on being like a services organization for the development and operations, for seeing themselves more as part of the value creation side of the business, instead of seeing it like more like an us versus them type scenario. Which I would say that's probably the structure that a lot of security teams have found themselves in over the last decade. But now saying, I am part of delivering this service, I am the security part of delivering this, and I'm trying to figure out how I can add value into this. And there's that famous quote, is it Etsy and like Riot Games and other places have had this, and it says something like, if you're a blocker, this is to security, if security is a blocker, then it's going to be routed around, and people are just going to do their own thing anyways. So try to find out ways not to be a blocker, but to provide feedback loops into the people that are providing the, writing the applications or supporting the applications, and being part of the kind of the value delivery story.
Yeah, and we have history here, right? We saw this in the early days of cloud and shadow IT, and people were like, no, you can't use it. People were using it anyways. They went around, they did their own thing, and it created this, interesting tension with the CIOs and the IT organizations and the business, because the business saw an advantage of using cloud and IT was a blocker. I think security has a lot to learn from some of those stories, because we potentially put ourselves in the same place, as if we are not there to enable and we're there to block. They're going to go around us, and that's not healthy for the business long term, because that means bugs, security bugs and other bugs, potentially aren't getting caught until they're in production. and could do something detrimental to the business, which I don't think any business wants to see, but they're not going to be slowed down. And so as security folks, I think we have to look at some of those other lessons learned and how do we become enablers?
Yeah. I have a friend of mine who, and names are removed for to preserve the innocence here, but I have a friend of mine who's a consultant, and he was talking to some folks who are doing Kubernetes, and he's like, "Oh, that's great. Well, how do you audit your Kubernetes, and how do you do that?" He's like, "Oh, we don't tell the auditors anything about Kubernetes, because if we did, like, boy, that would be horrible. Like they'd cause us all sorts of problems." And so that should be an illustration for us, and to say, okay, like if we're actively like keeping information out of our compliance and audit teams because we feel like they're just going to stop us and it would be too much of a problem, like obviously something is broken, because then you're not actually auditing the thing that you're using to deliver value. And the thing that you need to deliver value is so good that you can't do it. Otherwise you lose in the market. There's got to be some way to pull all this stuff together. And I think the organizations that are right thinking, they're kind of going that direction.
Yeah, and Kubernetes is only one layer in this new model. I mean,
That's just the
the complexity of these apps have gotten crazy. So I mean, Kubernetes is just one of many layers that potentially is not being addressed, which is not good in whole.
Yeah, I just bring up Kubernetes not to pick on Kubernetes, but just it's a recent last couple years technology. But the fact that it's actively being kept from the groups that are meant to keep you safe, like that's a problem.
Yeah, I mean, we could say the same things about something like Fargate, right? The configuration of Fargate in a serverless environment. This is all new stuff, right? So, traditionally we think about host-based security and network-based security, and when you move to something like Fargate, where there's really no host to protect, there's really no network. It's a set of configurations on how your containers run. There's potentially a whole new set of vulnerabilities and or misconfiguration items that should be addressed. But if they're not being addressed, that's not good.
Yeah.
All this modern technology. All right, folks. Just so you know, you got to look at all these items and figure out how to bring these security and DevOps teams together. We'll take a quick break and we'll come back and cover the news for this week.